Moni. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Aniruddha Ghosh. He is one of the most promising upcoming uh, teaching faculty of Institute of Child Health. Aniruddha came to us to do his MD degree, and then later on he passed the DNB examination, and he is in the process of completion in the final step of his MRCP-CH examination also. He is really a bright boy, very calm and quiet and composed young person, and he has at least 25 to 30 publications at this young age under his name. Uh, I've got nothing to say against in favor of Aniruddha anymore because it will take a long time also. And I'm really grateful to Johnson and Johnson for sponsoring this seminar, uh, especially for the postgraduates and the pediatricians who are practicing. Over to Dr. Aniruddha Ghosh.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, sir. After this overwhelming introduction, I'm going to start on the management of diarrhea in children. This presentation was made mainly for the purpose of the upcoming exam candidates and also for our day-to-day practices. So diarrhea is the leading cause of malnutrition and second most common cause of death in children under 5 years of age. For a long time, if you see the history of dehydration and death from dehydration, it goes back till 4400 BC. And as the years passed by, gradually we learned about IV saline. Then we learned about the cholera outbreak in Broad Street of London. Then the first cholera vaccine came. Then gradually oral rehydration solution was discovered. And so on. Last of all, we got the rotavirus vaccine after a few glitches. So what is diarrhea? If you see the definition of diarrhea, there are certain debates regarding the definition of diarrhea in children and infant. But mostly it is passage of 3 or more loose or liquid stools per day or more frequent passage than is normal for the individual. It is not a very specific one. It's quite vague, I agree. And it excludes the pasty stools of breastfed babies, which is often 15 to 16 times per day. So acute watery diarrhea, usually it lasts for several hours to days. Acute bloody diarrhea, which is also known as dysentery, and persistent diarrhea, which is more than 14 days of presumed infectious etiology. Now there is certain overlap between the persistent diarrhea and chronic diarrhea of these two entities. Often the chronic diarrhea, if it presents early, like 14 days, 15 days, it comes in between these two things, and then you have to exclude both the things. My talk will be focused mainly on acute diarrhea and certain things which will be concerned regarding the persistent diarrhea entity. But I'll not talk about the chronic diarrhea entity because it's a vast one and it is a bit more advanced one rather than this acute diarrhea. Now, acute diarrhea in infants or children, it is basically an interplay of factors, the host factors, host immunity and vaccination status, then diarrheal pathogens, the organisms itself, and the environmental factors like sanitation and environmental other conditions, these things. So regarding the causes of acute diarrhea, we all know that viral diarrhea is the most common one. Perhaps it is written as 40%, perhaps it is more in our country. One recent multicentric Indian study, it showed that it is around 70 to 80% caused by rotavirus, and then comes the adenovirus, and then the other viral etiologies. Bacterial infection, it is very less, 10 to 20%. If you regard all the literatures, both Indian as well as international etiologies. Parasitic, it is almost 1 to 5%. Then comes the other causes of acute diarrhea like food allergens, then reaction to medications, any inflammatory bowel disease presenting as acute diarrhea, then irritable bowel syndrome very rarely, these things. Now, persistent and chronic diarrhea, the infections, if it persists, it can cause persistent or chronic diarrhea. Then other causes like several malabsorption syndromes, immune or inflammatory causes, inborn error of metabolism, and structural defect and motility disorders. There are certain risk factors. I am not going into the details, but in acute diarrhea category, the most common risk factor or the most important risk factors it no exclusive breastfeeding in the babies, low birth weight, age between 6 to 12 months, malnutrition, summer and rainy season. So diarrhea is nothing but the reversal of the normal net absorptive status of water and electrolyte absorption to secretion. If you see, you can follow that in small intestine and in colon, the several etiologies like enteropathogenic E. coli, rotavirus, salmonella, and other organisms like Shigella toxin, you can see, cholera toxin, you can see. These organisms, they usually affect the small intestine and the colon. These two surfaces, they have several transporters like SGLT1, sodium glucose transporter 1, NHE3, DRA, these things. Now, certain etiological agents, they cause hampering of the function of these channels, and they cause increased secretion or increased secretion of free water or increased secretion of or decreased absorption of the electrolytes. Now, the acute diarrhea, it has got two components. One is osmotic component, one is secretory component. Regarding osmotic component, the stool volume is usually moderately increased. The diarrhea stops if you keep the patient on fasting. The stool osmolarity is normal to increased, and the ion gap is increased. But in secretory diarrhea, usually the free water content is very large, very much increased, so the stool volume is often expulsive, and very large amount of stool comes out in each purge. The diarrhea continues even after stopping of the feed, and stool osmolarity is usually normal, and ion gap is usually less than 100 milliosmol per kg. Small intestine and large intestinal original diarrhea can be differentiated by several clinical factors as well as certain biochemical parameters. Like in small bowel origin diarrhea, it is usually watery, large volume, very increased frequency of stool, and blood usually it is occult blood, and pH is acidic. Reducing substance is often positive in small bowel origin diarrhea. WBCs are less and serum WBCs are normal. But in case of large bowel diarrhea, usually it is mucoid or bloody. It is scanty in amount and the frequency is highly increased. There is often tenesmus, often grossly bloody, and pH is usually more than 5.5 with reducing substance status negative. WBCs are usually present in the stool in more than 10 per high power field capability. So if we talk about diarrheal management in exams, in theoretical exams, in practical exams of MD, DCH and DNB, we often encounter examiners asking about IMNCI. IMNCI management is a global management plan which has been devised to combat certain common pediatric disorders which causes significant mortality and morbidity globally, as we all know. So what is IMNCI and how do they assess, classify, and start the treatment? So young infant, you can see over here, they ask the question, this is young infant. Young infant means less than 2 months of age. And another slide is there which shows, does the child have diarrhea? Usually they mean more than 2 months to 5 years. So we'll concentrate upon the childhood diarrhea over here because the young infant entity is also covered in this here. So does a child have diarrhea? The first you ask the question and you get the answer. If yes, then ask for how long is there blood in stool. If there is blood in stool, then it comes directly into this last category. So it is dysentery and there is indication for treatment of antibiotic for 5 days and follow up in 2 days. Now, if there is no blood in stool, then look for the child's general condition, whether there is lethargy or unconsciousness, whether there is restlessness or irritability. You have to look for shrunken eyes, offer the child fluid, see whether the child is able to drink or poorly, or able to drink, or is he drinking poorly, how is the thirst. You have to classify according to that. Then comes your skin pinch. Pinching of skin, if it goes very slowly, longer than 2 seconds, or it is going slowly. For dehydration, there are three categories. One is severe dehydration, one is some dehydration, one is no dehydrations. Often we can see students, they start answering by mild, moderate, or severe. There is no mild, moderate, severe. There is only severe, some, and no dehydration. So, how do you classify severe dehydration? It is two of the following signs. One is CNS sign, that is lethargy or unconsciousness. Second is sunken eyes. Third is thirst. How is the child drinking? Not able to drink or drinking poorly is third category. And skin pinch is the fourth category. So CNS, eyes, thirst, and skin pinch. These four things you have to look for. And if two are present, then it is of severe dehydration. If the child has severe dehydration, then you have to manage according to plan C. We'll discuss the plans of management later on. First, concentrate on the categorization or the classifications of dehydration. Then in the next category, the milder variant is some dehydration. So what is some dehydration? Two of the following signs. One is restlessness or irritability. One is sunken eyes. One is drinks eagerly and thirsty. And one is skin pinch goes back slowly. Here there is very slowly. It is now slowly. So among these four, if only two are present, then you call it some dehydration. So in some dehydration, you give fluid, zinc supplement, and food for some dehydration. This patient has to be referred urgently to hospital with mother, and on the way to hospital, the mother has to give sips of ORS and continue breastfeeding. Then third is not enough signs to classify as some or severe dehydration. So these or these features are not present over there, but the child is having diarrhea. Then you call it no dehydration. You give fluid, zinc supplement, and food to treat diarrhea at home, and advise the mother when to return immediately. The warning signs you have to explain to the mother. Now, if the diarrhea is 14 days or more, then you classify it as persistent diarrhea as per definition. And if there is dehydration present, then you call it severe persistent diarrhea. If there is no dehydration, you call it only persistent diarrhea. In severe persistent diarrhea, the dehydration is treated before referral unless the child has another severe classification like PEM, like high grade fever, etc. And if the patient has to be referred to hospital. If there is no dehydration and the patient has persistent diarrhea, then the mother is to be advised regarding feeding, and you have to give supplements, multivitamins, minerals, including zinc for 14 days, and you follow up after 5 days. There are certain dietary plans which are being asked in every exam like MD, DCH, and DNB exam. What are the dietary management of persistent diarrhea? So you have to know in detail regarding that. That is out of the scope of this talk, so we will not discuss it. So the cornerstone of diarrheal management, acute diarrheal management, is ORS, oral rehydration solution, which is recommended by WHO and promoted by UNICEF. So what are the components of ORS? ORS contains sodium chloride 2.6 grams per liter, glucose 13.5 grams per liter, potassium chloride 1.5 grams per liter, trisodium citrate 2.9 gram per liter. If you want to remember it in a easy manner, then remember the millimole per liter entities. They are easier to remember. You can see sodium and glucose. These are equal 75 millimole per liter. Then comes the chloride 65 millimole per liter. Then comes the potassium 20 millimole per liter, and then the citrate. Sodium and glucose, these are equal. As you know, the basis of ORS is sodium glucose transporter 1. If you give only free water, it will not enter into the cell or intravascular space. You have to give sodium and glucose both, so they are carried along with each other. Now, situations where oral rehydration solution or oral rehydration therapy may fail. If there is high rate of purging, suppose the child is passing watery stools of more than 15 ml per kg per hour of volume. If there is persistent vomiting, the child cannot drink due to severe vomiting, 4 or more episodes of vomiting per hour. The child cannot drink due to fatigued condition or in a lethargic state, or the child has a severe stomatitis, then also the VRT will fail, and glucose malabsorption also will make the situation bad, because you know, glucose is there in your ORS. So what are the indications for hospitalization? Indications for hospitalizations are very few, and it comes under the umbrella of Plan C or severe dehydration category. So, shock, severe dehydration, which is more than 9% loss of body weight, neurological abnormalities like lethargy, seizures, etc., intractable or bilious vomiting, inability to take any ORS, failure of oral rehydration, suspected surgical conditions where there is increased amount of secretory diarrhea, and conditions for a safe follow-up and home management are not met. Suppose the child comes with a mother from a faraway place where there is no referral facility or nearby health facility, then you have to hospitalize. Now, what are the indications for IV rehydration? We have already seen that Plan C, there is scope of IV fluid rehabilitation. So mainly shock, dehydration with altered sensorium or severe acidosis, worsening of dehydration despite giving ORS, persistent vomiting, severe abdominal distension, ileus, where you have to keep the child in NPM condition. These conditions, they give you the indication that IV therapy is indicated. Not each and every patient should be given IV fluid therapy for acute diarrhea. So these are the Plan A and Plan B. So first come to Plan A. Plan A is treatment of diarrhea at home. So what to tell the mother? You tell the mother to continue breastfeeding. You give ORS or clean water. You give home-based formulas like soup, rice water, yogurt drinks, etc. Salted solutions are preferred rather than unsalted preparations, because if you give only salt-free formulations, then you will land up in hyponatremic dehydration. If you give too much of salt, then you will also land up in hypernatremic dehydration. So you have to keep a balance between these things, and especially important to give ORS very frequently. You have to give extra packets of ORS to be used at home, and up to 2 years 50 to 100 ml of ORS should be given after each stool and in between them, and 2 years and more aged children, they should be given 100 to 200 ml after each loose stool and between them. If the child vomits, then you have to wait for 10 minutes, and again you have to start slowly. You give supplement for zinc and show the mother how to give zinc supplements. Usually in government they give the zinc tablets. Half tablet is equivalent to 10 milligram, and one tablet is equivalent to 20 milligram. As we all know that up to 6 months it is 10 milligram per day for 14 days, and 6 months and onwards it is 20 milligram per day for 14 days. So continue feeding, and you tell the mother to return after 2 days, or if any of the danger signs appear. In Plan B, there is some dehydration. You have to give ORS in a slightly increased manner. So what is the increased manner? You have to give the recommended amount of ORS over a 4 hour of period to correct the deficit as well as replenish the electrolyte stores. It can be easily calculated if you know the weight of the child by 75 ml per kg. If the child wants more ORS, then you can give. For infants under 6 months who are not breastfed, also give 100 to 200 ml of clean water during this period. Show the mother how to give ORS solution. After 4 hours, reassess and classify the child for rehydration. Select the appropriate plan to continue treatment. Usually it is Plan A. You can discharge and then see or observe the patient at home, and tell the mother when to return. Zinc supplements and feeding, these are to be continued as usual in Plan A. Now the severe dehydration, you have to go for Plan C, where you start IV fluids immediately. In between the IV access is available. You have to give ORS, and then you start ringer lactate or normal saline. They usually don't prefer any dextrose containing formulations over here in IMNCI protocol. They give normal saline or ringer lactate. So if the infant is under 12 months, then first give 30 ml of per kg of fluid in 1 hour, then give 70 ml per kg in 5 hours. If the child is 12 months to 5 years of old, then you give 30 ml per kg in 30 minutes. That is half the time in case of infants, and then give 70 ml per kg of fluid in 2.5 hours. The amount is same, but the time is half. You have to reassess the child in between 1 to 2 hours. You have to, if the hydration status is not improving, then give the IV drip more rapidly. But also you have to give ORS, and you have to repeatedly reassess the child regarding the vital status. If IV treatment is not available, or you suppose the child is having a problem in IV access, then you can also try the nasogastric route. Oral or enteric route is always a preferred mode if you can access over it. And if there is no urgency, then you can give NG tube or OG tube ORS in an amount of 120 ml per kg with repeated reassessment. If it is absolutely necessary, then there is no other way. You have to have some IV access. If not, then you can have bone marrow needle, and you can do the intraosseous channel also. Immunize the child after follow-up if the child falls in severe category or some dehydration or no dehydration. Now, complications of acute gastroenteritis, usually regarding the sodium status, the dehydrations usually are classified as isonatremic, hyponatremic, and hypernatremic dehydration. In hyponatremia, lethargic convulsion, these are very much common, usually resolves with ORS and IVF. Usually sodium correction we rarely give in hyponatremic dehydration. But the problem is more in case of hypernatremic dehydration. The child is extremely thirsty, and you can see that the dehydration status is not so bad. It is out of the thirst is out of proportion to the dehydration status of the child. And the childs are often very irritable, and sometimes convulsions also occur. So we have found that in hypernatremic dehydration, people often hurry too much and give hypotonic solutions. But you should never use hypotonic solutions in hypernatremic dehydration, and rather you should give isonatremic fluid or isotonic fluid in a rather increased manner, like 100, instead of 100% of maintenance fluid, you can start with 120, 130%. Then you repeatedly assess the sodium level and go according to it. You need not bring down the sodium level very early or very rapidly, because it will cause more harm. Usually we keep a target of 10 to 12 milliequivalents of sodium decrease in 24 hours. Then there are chances of hypokalemia, especially if the child is very much malnourished. There is protein allergy malnutrition or severe acute malnutrition. Then the child may have hypokalemia. In that case, you have to give supplemental potassium in the form of oral potchlor or injectable potchlor in the IV fluid. The child may land up in metabolic acidosis, and in metabolic acidosis, you have to give the normal fluid deficit correction plus the normal maintenance correction. Very rarely you give sodium bicarbonate correction. Now there is a long-term debate whether normal saline and ringer lactate has got any advantage over each other in case of severe metabolic acidosis. In normal saline administration, it has been seen that there is hyperchloremic acidosis, but there are several randomized control studies, and it has been seen that no fluid, not one fluid is superior to the other if we compare both. Now, zinc. Administration of zinc is must, although pediatricians are very much skeptical about giving zinc at the first instance, because sometimes zinc causes very much gastric irritation and patient may vomit and become very much disinterested in drinking ORS. So in that case, you can start after 1 or 2 days or so, but you have to give zinc at some point of your treatment, because there are certain benefits of zinc in acute gastroenteritis. Often we get this question in several examinations and people have to write. So I have mentioned these things in a point-wise manner. Like zinc reduces the fluid and salt loss in stools by improving the mucosal permeability. It improves the mucosal permeability. Then there is accelerated regeneration of mucosa. There is increased levels of brush border enzymes. There is enhanced cellular immunity, higher levels of secretory IgA. It improves the absorption of ORS by increasing the permeability. It reduces the severity and duration of illness, also reduces the chances of complication, and also it reduces the future episodes of developing diarrhea or pneumonia for next 3 months. A big issue in pediatric acute gastroenteritis management is never to withhold feed until and unless it is indicated in special circumstances. If you hold the feed, it will not only hamper the management of diarrhea, but also it will cause some problem. What will it do? It will gradually, the brush borders of the enteral pathway will be denuded, and there will be more and more secretory components. So you need to have your brush borders, epithelial cells in an intact manner, or enterocytes in an intact manner, to facilitate mucosal repair after injury. most of the infants, they can tolerate the breastfeeding, so breastfeeding should be continued. And acute diarrheal episodes usually do not require any change in the dilution of formula feed also. You need not withhold, or you need not change the formula into a low lactose or lactose free formulation just for 1 or 2 days of acute diarrheal illness. And older children, you have to give appropriate feeding. If you consider the nutritional status of the children, then usually just after diarrhea, you have to increase the calorie intake up to 100 to 150% of the normal calorie intake, because during this time there is severe weight loss usually seen in the children. Now the question is whether antibiotics are indicated in diarrhea or not. As you can see that most of the diarrhea, they are of viral etiology, 70 to 90% in Indian as well as in Western studies. There is no indication of antibiotics in acute gastroenteritis in children, but there are certain indications where you have to give antibiotics. Two among them are absolute indication. One is cholera, one is dysentery. Dysentery does not mean that microscopic OBT or occult blood test is positive. You have to see the blood with the naked eyes. If you see the naked eye blood, then you stamp it as dysentery and you start IV antibiotic or oral antibiotic, whichever is feasible. But a microscopic report of a stool sample, it does not indicate anything, because sometimes in adenoviral diarrhea also and sometimes in other viral diarrhea also you can get some microscopic blood. Now there are some relative indications of antibiotics. Severe acute malnutrition, if you feel that the child if the child may be harboring some infection, you can start antibiotics. If there is any small infant, then you can also start antibiotics if you suspect there is any sepsis or focus of sepsis. Parenteral diarrhea, the term parenteral diarrhea usually signifies that there is some infection or some sepsis focus somewhere in the body, like in the form of otitis media, in the form of pneumonia, in the form of UTI. And as a result of the systemic response, the child is having liquid stools or secretory stools, and you are seeing it as diarrhea. But in those cases, you have to find out the focus, and then if you find, then you can give antibiotics. Another thing is, after starting IV fluid therapy, especially in case of severely dehydrated children, if you start a IV fluid bolus after just giving doing an IV cannula, please be very attentive regarding the response of therapy. You cannot just start the fluid and just leave the place. You have to see whether the child is improving, whether the heart rate which has gone up due to dehydration is coming down, and whether there is any other problem regarding your fluid therapy. Very rarely, but you can very rarely, or you can say sometimes also, acute viral myocarditis may accompany viral acute gastroenteritis. And if you just leave the bolus over there running and you leave the place, the child may land up in shock. The child may worsen. So you don't leave your patient unattended during the early fluid resuscitation. That you should remember, that at least during the IV bolus therapy, you need to be there. You need to reassess the child whether the fluid therapy is improving your patient or worsening it. Now, when do you need to evaluate medically or evaluate for underlying cause? What are the pointers that this child needs some medical evaluation for a diarrheal disease? If the child is very young, like below 6 months or less than 8 kg, if there is a history of premature birth, any chronic medical condition, if there is high grade of fever, you suspect that there is sepsis, if you find there is blood in stool for more than 2 weeks, very high output diarrhea, caregivers report of signs consistent with dehydration, there is any change of mental status, there is persistent vomiting, there is suboptimal response to ORT, then you need to worry about whether there is any underlying cause of this diarrhea apart from simple viral illness. Now, when do you discharge the patient? You discharge the patient when there is sufficient rehydration and you are sure that the parents or caregivers, whoever is taking care of the baby, they are confident enough to continue with the oral rehydration solutions, and medical follow-up is also available if there is any need. Now, there are certain considerations in severe acute malnutrition. The severe acute malnutrition, malnourished babies, they are quite different from the normal babies, and they are in a reductive adaptation with high intracellular sodium and low potassium. So misdiagnosis and overestimation of dehydration is common in children with severe acute malnutrition. Fluid therapy is very challenging because if you give just a simple bolus, they might land up in fluid overload and heart failure, because sometimes they are in an incipient state of heart failure, a compensated heart failure. Your fluid bolus or IV fluid therapy can make it a unmasked heart failure. So rehydration by oral route or through nasogastric tube is much more preferred method, because an invasive method in a SAM child might get the child in a more septic condition. You can introduce some infections by doing it. IV fluid should be given only to the children with shock. So in case of SAM children, the ORS to be used is Resomel. But Resomel is not readily available everywhere, especially it is not available commercially. So how do you make Resomel from normal ORS or WHO recommended ORS? I have seen many a times that this question has been asked to students and they don't know the answer. So I have written this answer over here so that they can answer next time. It is, you just take the normal ORS, one sachet, that is a big sachet which is normally to be diluted in 1 liter of water. You dilute it in a 2 liter of water and you add additional glucose, additional potassium, 50 gram of glucose and 45 ml of syrup pot chlor or 30 ml of injection pot chlor, which contains 60 ml equivalent of potassium.
Aniruddha, little louder.
Okay, sir. So Resomel can be made if you have your normal WHO ORS. So these two flowcharts I have taken from Indian Journal of Practical Pediatrics. These are very much useful if you get this question anywhere in your exam, like rehydration algorithm of SAM with diarrhea. You do not give ORS or you do not give IV fluid in normal dose. You give it in a very premeditated dose with measurement of weight before and after. You start MORS, you start in a 5 ml per kg, then you give it every 30 minutes for 2 hours, then you measure the weight. If there is improvement, then you continue with it. If there is signs of over rehydration, then you have to stop. If the weight is stable, then you increase the MORS by 5 ml per kg per hour up to 50 ml per kg per hour, then reassess the child. If there is loss in spite of giving MORS, then the child needs reassessment and you have to increase MORS further, like 10 ml per kg per hour, because intravascular volume is much more depleted in this child. In severe acute malnutrition and shock management, I have kept it over here, but I don't think I'm going to discuss it. So preventive measures against persistent diarrhea. An acute diarrhea, if not managed properly, can land up into persistent diarrhea due to persistence of infection and persistence of reintroduction of infective agents by poor sanitation and other measures. So promotion of breastfeeding and safe weaning, complementary feeding. So feeding establishment and early feeding with prebiotic agents. Prebiotic agents, you know, which usually give rise to give nutrition to the probiotic agents, then prompt correction of diarrheal dehydration, overall nutritional management, zinc supplementation, avoidance of or avoidance of starvation therapy so that you retain your brush borders over your enterocytes, then complete exclusion of lactose from diet for mild transient lactose intolerance, which is frequent in acute diarrhea, not in every case where you suspect transient lactose intolerance, then only you exclude lactose. Avoidance of indiscriminate use of ORS, carbonated drinks, and antimicrobial therapy. To conclude, diarrheal illness is the second leading cause of childhood mortality. The approach to the child with diarrhea includes classification of the type of diarrheal illness, assessment, correcting the fluid electrolyte losses, and assessment and reassessments are two cornerstone of this management. So never ever leave the patient without any reassessment. And also search for the comorbid conditions, especially if there is any severe acute malnutrition, if there is any underlying renal, cardiac problem, then you have to address the child and you have to modify your IV fluid therapy. In general, the approach of rehydration in severe acute malnutrition is different from your normal therapy. Antibiotics are not indicated for children with acute watery diarrhea. Treatment of invasive diarrhea includes the same approach to fluids, electrolytes, and nutrition, and empiric antibiotic therapy are needed only exclusively in cases of cholera and your dysentery conditions. So these are the things I have voluntarily kept the probiotic segments out of this thing, because till now, the MNCI is not regarding probiotic as an option. Perhaps in future, after some concrete evidences come up and it is also cheap, it becomes also cheap, then maybe they can prescribe it globally, or they endorse it globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Aniruddha, for your excellent presentations. But I have got a few uh, points to discuss.
Definitely, sir.
One is what I see that people are using a combination of metronidazole and ofloxacin. I want to stress that the role of metronidazole in diarrhea or in dysentery is very, very less. Not more than 2% of the dysenteries in our country are actually due to amoebic dysentery. So what's your take on this?
Definitely, sir. Actually, as I have mentioned in the etiology segment, in Indian studies, it has been found it is almost 1 to 5%. That
Yeah,
too in like very rural places where the sanitation is very poor and people are not getting proper healthcare facilities. There is overcrowding. Then that perhaps that matters. And rest 95% to 99%, they are of viral etiology, mostly
yeah,
rotavirus, then adenovirus, and then certain other viruses. So
okay.
giving a metronidazole has got some other adversities also, because metronidazole is a very irritant drug. It causes gastritis, it alters the taste sensation, and the main cornerstone of the therapy, ORS, it hampers the ORS therapy also. So it is a complete wastage
Yeah,
of, I think,
yes,
money and time, and
yes.
also
So my suggestion to all the juniors that please do not use a combination of ofloxacin and metronidazole. And you know the restrictions by the DCGI on ofloxacin, and it has become resistant in our country. So for Southeast Asia, ofloxacin is not a good combination. Please always use some other antibiotics. And I have also seen a lot of prescriptions of zinc using below 2 months. And please see that he has already shown that the zinc not to be given below 2 months of age. Now, my worry is that the too much of use of zinc for diarrheas or dysenteries or maybe a little bit of loose stool will also cause copper deficiency. And we know that the copper is also a essential micronutrient. So we need to be very careful in overusing the zinc.
absolutely, sir.
And it's not going to cure all the types of diarrhea. And especially in well-nourished children, the zinc deficiency is not that common. But still, that doesn't mean that I will not use zinc. But the only problem that I find with zinc is that the test is not at all liked by the children.
Definitely.
The test of zinc is not at all good. So remember that. Most important thing in viral diarrhea is the counseling of the parents. And the parents always think, what is this? This is just a simple diarrhea and the doctor cannot stop it. But one of the most difficult treatment that I find in my our private practice is the viral diarrhea. And telling them right in the beginning that it's going to persist for 5 to 7 days. And if it is an adenovirus diarrhea, then it is for 10 to 14 days is very, very important because otherwise you will lose your patient that it is not being controlled. They will switch to the other doctors. And second half of the second doctor will be in a better position because the diarrhea by then is in the subsiding state. And remember always that severe dehydration is not an indication always for IV fluid. It's a severe dehydration with shock is an absolute indication for IV fluid. Am I right?
Yes, sir. First you have to try for enteral route. If it is
Yeah.
not possible, or you have to very rapidly correct the intravascular volume status, then only you go for IV fluid.
Yes. And what about homemade solutions? I find it very difficult because there is always a chance of hyponatremia or hypernatremia. So if you have an option, then I think the commercial formulas should be used. Am I right?
Yeah, there is no doubt about it, because you cannot just measure the salt in at home and add to the solutions. If you give
Yeah.
less salt, you will end up in hyponatremic dehydration. If you give more salt, then there will be more purging or there will be hypernatremic dehydration. So it is not that practical. But since
Yeah.
they have mentioned it over here, that's why I have kept. Probably
Yeah.
they are
I mean,
thinking
in a
about,
desperate situation,
yeah, like
we
African
don't have a
countries. Right.
preparation. In the middle of the night, you are in
Hmm,
Darjeeling
hmm.
for holidays. So there you can give. And so the next thing is that some children, they don't like these vinegar flavors or orange flavors and other flavors. They like plain ORS. So always remember that, but just because it is vinegar flavor, vanilla flavor, they will take it. So it's not like that. And sometimes in a situation, we have also used an nasogastric drip. I mean, we are not getting the vein. We cannot do the interosseous line.
Right away. Right. Definitely.
Sorry,
Yeah.
nasogastric drip can be a good option in those situations. So don't forget that also. And there is a question of purging rate more than 5 ml per kg per hour. So what is the purging rate where you will say that it is more? Is it 5 or 10 ml, or is it at all useful? I find it
No.
it is not at all
Mm,
useful.
mm.
It is not at all useful to go for the purging rate. It's not possible to
Right.
calculate that. So that's the important thing. And the role of prebiotic in acute and persistent diarrhea. Uh, Pre and probiotic, uh, I had a presentation. Is it a hype? Yes, it is a hype because it has been seen in acute diarrhea. The probiotic uh, may help in for 24 hours, means the duration of diarrhea may be reduced by 24 hours, whereas the homeopathic medicine in that study has reduced the diarrhea by 17 hours. So now you need to decide which way, which drugs you will use, whether to go for homeopathic medicines or probiotics. I do not use probiotics at all because I do not find enough benefit on this. Whatever it is, lactobacillus GG or others, hardly there is any role. And the cost of the probiotics is also not much less.
Is exuberant, sir. Yes.
Exuberant. So don't forget that fact that the cost of a probiotic sachet is around 45 to 50 rupees. So it doesn't really help in that way. And thank you. I will invite our next speaker, Dr. Arunalok Bhattacharya, a long associate of mine, starting from his student days. So, and now a deputy director of the Institute of Child Health. Well, welcome, Arunalok.
Thank you, Apurva, after an excellent presentation by Aniruddha. I would like to go a bit away from the students, and I would like to concentrate on the practitioners more. So today I'll be discussing on the infantile colic, focusing on the transient lactose intolerance. So it's really exciting to present any seminar before an whopping audience of almost 150. So good evening, everybody. So, we shall be discussing the infantile colic, especially with a focus on transient lactose intolerance in these three headings. One is what is infantile colic, the lactase deficiency, that is the transient one, and the lactase replacement therapy. Before we start, we have to understand that there are two other varieties of so-called lactose intolerance or lactase deficiency. First is the transient lactose intolerance or secondary lactose intolerance that has been mentioned by Dr. Aniruddha after any gastrointestinal episode or infection. And the second one is a persistent deficiency of the lactase, which is found in almost one third of the Indian population. These two we are not going to discuss today. We shall be concentrating our discussion on the transient lactase deficiency. So, when would we call a child's or the infant suffering from infantile colic? The workable definition is laid down by Wessel. The Wessel criteria being easy to remember: more than 3 hours a day, on more than 3 days a week, and duration being more than 3 weeks. But the clinical definition is what we follow from Rome 4 criteria for diagnosis of infantile colic. That states that infant less than 5 months of age when symptoms start and stop, recurrent abdominal, prolonged period of infant crying, fussing or irritability that occur without obvious cause and cannot be prevented or resolved. And the third one is a modification of the Wessler's criteria, that is incessant crying for 3 hours per day during 3 or more days in the preceding week, and the total amount of crying and fussing is more than 3 hours, even if it is not continuous, but 24 hours. So this is a workable, the definition of infantile colic. And I'm sure that all of my fellow practitioners, they have encountered this problem into their day-to-day practice. So what we can see that crying patterns in these unselected infants, irrespective of the breastfeeding and the infant milk formula, they remain constant for the last 40 years, and this colicky episodes, they peak between 6 p.m. to 12 midnight. So that is a pattern that has been there for about last 4 or 5 decades. The study shows like that. Now, how common is this infantile colic? Infantile colic is very common within the first 4 months of life. And 1 in every 4 babies, that is 25% of the infants, they suffer from infantile colic. And this colic is really not related to the breast milk or the infant milk formula. It is infantile colic affects between 10 to 30% of babies on breast or formula fed, irrespective of the modality of the feeding. Now, why we are concerned with this infantile colic? Yes, there are several complications, so-called complications of infantile colic. I'm not going into the detail of the discussion, but these 2 points are very important to discuss with. The first one is from the infantile point of view, that is, infantile colic can cause failure to thrive and extreme cases, dehydration, and sometimes electrolyte imbalance may be there due to inadequate milk intake. And more commonly, it contributes to the impaired parent-child bonding, and which may amount to the risk of non-accidental injury. And this sounds very astonishing that this infantile colic can give rise to this non-accidental injury. But there are studies. there are studies, there are very few studies from India, but one study in Netherlands, it showed that infants aged 6 months, 5.6% of the parents reported having smothered, slapped, or shaken their baby at least once because from their crying. So this is a quite good number of children who suffered from non-accidental injury due to just infantile colic. And risk of detrimental actions were highest for parents from non-industrialized countries. So we in India might also maybe we are encountering a number of this non-accidental injuries due to infantile colic, which has not yet been reported. So what are there are several causes which are being laid down as a etiology for this infantile colic, but we will be concentrating only on this lactose intolerance part. So temporary lactose intolerance can be due to transient lactase deficiency. In babies, there may not be enough of naturally occurring lactase enzymes to digest milk. Transient lactase deficiency is a form of infant lactose intolerance that is a result of immature digestive system. You know that the digestive system takes about 6 months to 1 year to develop, at least for its digestive capacity to achieve the adult level, almost adult level. So this immature digestive system, and almost all babies will outgrow it by 3 to 4 months. That is why the infantile colic is very much common, probably within 4 months of their life. So by about 4 months, the body can usually produce enough lactase on its own to relieve most digestive distress. And in situations of overfeeding, it may also contribute to the lactose intolerance because the existing lactase enzyme cannot handle the overload of the lactose. So what percentage of infant colic is due to lactase deficiency? There was a trial that was conducted by DJ Moore, which showed that among the 122 healthy newborn infants, he just measured the breath hydrogen production after feedings containing lactose, that is a human milk or the infant milk formula, in colicky as well as non-colicky infants, and it was a comparative study. So it showed that 68% of the infants who were fed with lactose containing milk, they showed the features of infantile colic. And the baseline breath H2 values were significantly higher at both 6 weeks of age as well as this 12 weeks of age. They were the considerable number of these infants showed the increased hydrogen in their breath, which is a marker for this lactose intolerance. So among 68% of the infants, about 78% of the colicky infants show signs of lactose intolerance, both at 6 weeks, that is 1.5 months, and 3 months of age. So there was a considerable number of the infants who were showing the features of infantile colic, probably was suffering from transient lactose intolerance, both at 6 weeks and 12 weeks of age. Now, why this discomfort occurs due to the undigested lactose? Let's have a quick look. The lactose, you know, that is digested upon by lactase enzyme in the small intestine, which splits lactose into glucose and galactose, which is a easily absorbable sugar. But if this lactase is deficient, so the lactose comes down as it is in the large intestine. It escapes the digestive capacity of the small intestine and enters into the large intestine. And in large intestines, there are several microbiota which acts upon this lactose and splits it into lactate, acetate, and small chain fatty acids. These three compounds are formed in the large intestine. These small chain fatty acids are taken care of by the digestive system, but this lactate and acetate, they causes excessive gas formation, in turn causing flatulence, abdominal distension, abdominal pain, and sometimes diarrhea, and not to speak of infantile colic. Probably this acetate and this lactate, these two compounds are the culprits for this developing the symptoms of infantile colic. As the gastrointestinal system matures, the lactase activity increases, and the chances of undigested lactose going into the large intestine is reduced. So what is the answer for this? What we can do in this transient lactase deficiency? So infants and premature babies lack lactase enzymes in their GI tract. Lactase replacement treats the original root cause of infantile colic due to lactose intolerance. Lactase this enzyme is considered to be safe and natural way of treatment, comes under the food supplements. And if colic symptoms improve with lactase enzyme, then it should be continued for at least 4 to 6 month period. Lactase can also be considered as a diagnostic tool for infantile colic, as if the lactase decreases crying time, then the same can be continued for 4 to 6 months. And studies have shown that reduction in crying time symptoms and reduction of expired hydrogen, that is a hydrogen breath test, that is also becomes negative with lactase supplementation. And lactase enzyme also indirectly promotes breastfeeding, as it aids in the digestion of lactose and decreases the incidence of infantile colic, and in turn decreases the anxiety of the mother. So benefits of lactase, the source, what is the source of this lactase? It is one of the sources are Aspergillus oryzae. And it has been found that lactase from Aspergillus oryzae has been approved by Food Safety and Standard Authority of India. Lactase preparations from this Aspergillus oryzae are stable in acidic environment and practically pH independent. That is very important, because once we give lactase enzyme orally, it has to pass the barrier of the gastric acidity, which has a pH of 3.5. Remember, it's not very easy to withstand that acidic pH of the stomach. So the lactase which we are providing, or which is being provided from outside, that has to withstand the acidity of stomach, which has a pH of 3.5, and this lactase enzyme passes that acidity. Guidelines as European Food Safety and US FDA also recommends this source. The source of lactase, as I have already mentioned, this is considered as generally recommended as safe, lactase. Source of lactase impacts the pH stability of final preparation, which decides the dose efficacy and safety and cost. And lactase from Aspergillus oryzae has high activity throughout the GI tract, which already been mentioned. Now, what are the guideline statements? The National Institute for Health and Care Excellent, it recommends that parents who are unable to cope with excessive crying, 1 week trial, clinical trial with lactase can be given. And if lactase therapy improves the symptom, it can be given till 4 to 6 months during infancy, which they start producing the lactase. After they start producing the lactase on their own, it can be taken off after 4 to 6 months of age. And the next part is the lactose, secondary lactose intolerance. All of you know that after gastroenteritis, the tip of the villi gets denuded. The lactase enzyme, the maximum concentration of the lactase enzyme is at the tip of the villi. And after an episode of, or a bout of gastroenteritis, that tip is denuded, and there is a transient lactase deficiency, which may cause a transient lactose intolerance. We need not stop the lactose containing milk at that time. Maybe we may reduce it, but it is not required at all because it's a self-limiting condition and it will improve by its own. And there is also no scope of replacement for this short period of lactase deficiency in secondary lactose intolerance. And another is that more than 1/3 of the Indians suffer from the genetic lactase deficiency. This topic is beyond the scope of today's discussion. So next time we can discuss some other day. It may be discussed. This is also very important. So with that, I conclude my discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Orunalo, for your very short and precise information on lactose. It's one of the controversial topic that what's the role of lactose. What I feel that there are 3 types of lactose intolerance is that the ontogenetic, whereas you in some phases of life you have the lactase deficiency, like in a preterm baby or some races like Indian, Greek, Orientals, they have, like in Zambia, almost 100% of population becomes lactase deficient. So, so in those babies, you can have the more colic about that. But I also feel that whether this lactase is causing this problem or is it the cow's milk protein that is going through the breast milk in a mother who is consuming a lot of cow's milk and causing the colic. Because we have seen also that the stopping the cow's milk in the mother's diet also decreases the colic. But the answer is still not there. And then again, some babies who has a temperament problem, they have more chance of colic. If the baby is by birth little bit of irritable type, they will go on crying. So we don't know about that. And this criteria for colic definition that you have seen, you have shown us, is not always very practical to use in our day-to-day practice. As regards your child abuse, you said that 5.6% in some countries, maybe Scandinavian, you said, no? Yeah, Scandinavian countries. But fortunately, in our country, we have the grandparents who waits throughout the night for this type of babies immediately after first few months.
Right.
And the practice of going to the mother's place in the first few months is a very good practice, because the mother, these mothers, they feel more comfortable with their own mother rather than the mother-in-law. So from that point of view, and also because of the supervision by the grandparents, the child abuse may be slightly less in our country. And I also doesn't recommend, I don't recommend using of soya milk too frequently for the infantile colic, because remember that the lactose is the only source of galactolipids, which is necessary for the brain development, because the brain major component is the galactolipids, and it comes from the lactose in the breast milk. And if you compare the size of the cow's brain and the size of the human brain in relation to the body size, the human brain size is just the double of that of cow's brain. And if you compare the lactose content of the breast milk and the lactose content of the cow's milk, it is again just the double. Whereas the lactose content is about 3.7 grams per 100 ml, the breast milk contains 7 grams per 100 ml. So the lactose is necessary for the breast milk. And this high lactose also helps in avoiding the hard stool in the baby. So think twice before changing from lactose to any other formula. And at the end, I am really grateful to Walter Bushnell and Johnson & Johnson for sponsoring this wonderful seminar presented by two young stars like Dr. Aniruddha Ghosh and Dr. Arunalok Bhattacharya.
I'm not that young.
Oh, yes, you look. You are young.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't find dose of lactase. Yeah, there is a question of dose of lactase as replacement. Arunalok, can you say, unmute yourself, unmute yourself.
Sorry. What is the question?
Dose of lactase as replacement. How do you give?
Yes. It is different for the breast milk as well as it is different from the artificial milk. For breast milk, the only point which what I feel that it is not very healthy is that you have to express the breast milk and you have to put 5 or 6 drops of this lactase in the fore milk, but that is rich in that is rich in lactose. So about 5 to 10 ml of the fore milk is taken, and in that the 5 to 6 drops of this lactase enzyme is mixed, and it is fed to the baby. After that, the breast milk is being fed, and for this infant milk formula, that the amount of 5 to 6 drops is okay, and the amount of milk, artificial milk, will be 30 to 40 ml. So that 5 to 6 drops is to be mixed with 30 to 40 ml of infant milk formula, and then it is to be fed like that.
I mean, there are several brands. Can you mention if, I mean, 1 or 2 brands that is available in the market? Because
yes, one is the commercial name is Yamu, and another is a Protectis.
Yeah, what about Neosmile and others? Protectis, I think it is for infantile colic because it contains Lactobacillus reuteri.
Yes, that.
And in the treatment of infantile colic with probiotics, only one strain has been approved in infantile colic,
Yes.
that is Lactobacillus reuteri, and that is Protectis.
Yes.
But for lactase activity, Protectis is not very good.
No.
But there are some other brands like Neosmile and others. I'm not going into that, but Yamu is a very common brand that is being used. And but avoidance, as I said, that the avoidance of cow's milk in the mother's diet sometimes helps.
That is very important.
And even beef sometimes can help.
Right. So to that question, I can see that lactase deficiency causing infantile colic is very much going against nature. For that, we have to, it needs a long discussion because we have to see the evolution of the human being and with the lactase deficit among the different, as you have mentioned. So it's a long question, a long answer. So probably we shall be discussing someday else.
No, there is a question that shall it be given with every feeding, or is it 4 times a day? The lactase that you have said with the milk, is it with every feeding?
Ideally, it should be with every feed.
There is a question. We normally do not stop breastfeeding in diarrhea with lactose intolerance, but resort to stopping formula feed. Why?
Sorry, what is the question? We do not stop lactose.
We normally do not stop breastfeeding in diarrhea with lactose intolerance, but resort to stopping formula feed.
No, there is no, if it is a transient lactose intolerance or the secondary lactose intolerance, there is no question of stopping neither the breast milk nor the artificial milk. So it is a transient one. So it will be, it will go away anyway within few days. So lactose containing milk, be it in the form of breast milk or infant milk formula, they're not to be stopped.
Yeah, I mean, see, the other thing that I would like to mention that the soybean milk has not been recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics
Below
below
6 months.
6 months. So think twice, discuss with the parents before starting soybean milk in children's below 6 months. And because I have seen, they have come to me with a Google search that this is not being, this should not be given below 6 months, but my doctor has given. So be careful about using too much of soybean milk, because of the other thing is also that the isoflavones that you find in soya may not be very good, because this has an estrogenic effect on the baby. So I normally do not stop or dilute the milk. The reason I tell them that, see, I explain to them that if I'm giving 30 units and maybe 15 units is going out and 15 units is going to the body, and that is what you cannot see. You can see only 15 units that is going out. Now, if I make it from 30 to 15, then 7.5 units will go out and 7.5 unit will go into the body. Now, what you see is that the diarrhea has decreased from 15 units to 7.5 units. But what you cannot see is that the going to the body has also decreased from 15 units to 7.5 units, and which will lead to malnutrition. So just because the diarrhea is persisting, and especially if it is a viral diarrhea, hardly any role. But if you can prove that it is a lactose intolerance and it is persistent, then there is a role for lactose, low lactose diet or lactose free formula. And we do stop sometimes breast milk, even if it is when it is persistent for long periods of time. So that's the main reason that you should not dilute your milk, because that will decrease the calorie also. It may improve the stool cosmetically, but will not help the baby in any way. I hope I have satisfied with my answer, Bhupida. Dr. Manocha's question is this.
Yes.
Any other question? Otherwise, we'll conclude. I once again thank Johnson & Johnson and Walter Bushnell and Dr. Arunalok Bhattacharya, Aniruddha Ghosh, and all the participants in this wonderful seminar.
Thank you.
Thank you.